Hi everyone, it's Amy, and today I'm sharing a sew along for McCall's 8680 View A. This is a pattern for a fun vest style top with optional lace trim, button loop front and lapel detail at the neckline. The construction for both views is pretty identical, aside from positioning lace trim into every seam, so you can still follow along regardless of which view you'd like to make. This video is for adventurous beginners who have already made at least a few garments, but if you need a refresher on your skills, head to simplicity.com and check out the video tutorials on different sewing techniques and the beginner sewing guides. I'm using the PDF version of this pattern, and I started with a size 12, but while checking my toile, I realised I needed to use the lengthen and shorten lines to adjust the pattern pieces and make a petite adjustment. That means I also need to adjust the number and spacing of my button loops down the front, and the last piece I need to adjust is my underflap. For this project, you'll find water-soluble marker very useful for when making view A, as you can mark easy to follow placement lines for your lace. An unpicker will also be handy to keep nearby in case your basting stitches from the lace trim need to be removed quickly. I'm using a beautiful red linen and a crocheted lace that is pretty much the same on both sides. If you can use a lace that's the same on both sides, it will make life much easier so you don't accidentally forget, position it the wrong way and have to unpick it. I'm using the same fabric for my outer and my lining. This lace isn't perfect because it's a little bit loose, but it has a centre line that I can make work. The instructions recommend interfacing the front, the lapel and the back strap from the outer fabric sections, and then interface the side front, back and side back of the lining sections. This is to help the areas under the highest strain, for example the centre front, which would have the button weight. Because I'm using a pretty stable fabric for both my outer and lining, I just went ahead and interfaced all my lining pieces. If you're using something lighter, like a cotton lawn or a delicate silk, follow the directions. You want to choose a lightweight interfacing that adds structure, but not too much bulk or thickness or stiffness. You want to be able to have a soft body, but be a bit more stable to sew. We'll follow the instructions in order, but to be more efficient, you can sew the outer and lining pieces at the same time because the construction is the same until you join them. If that sounds too confusing, don't worry, sew all your outer pieces first, then repeat this to sew your lining. Transfer all your markings and notches if you haven't already done so onto the fabric. If you are full busted, start by stay stitching within the seam allowance of the edge of the front, pattern piece 1, above the single notch in the bust area. This stitching stays in permanently to prevent stretching on curved edges. Pin one front section to its corresponding side front section, that's pattern piece number 2, placing the fabric right sides together, matching the notches and the small dot. Start pinning. I like to put a pin at either end and then work my way in between. And the easiest way to pin these curved seams is to just pin along the seam line, and I like to curve the fabric over my fingers as I work. Stitch the seam, back stitching at the small dot to reinforce the seam end. The curve of the side front is the problematic layer, and it makes the attached pieces sort of curve up. And when it comes to your sewing machine, you place the most problematic layer of the fabric on the bottom. And don't fight that curve. Let it approach the sewing machine and slightly lift your fabric until it reaches underneath the needle. That will help you get around the curve without making any puckers. You're going to press that seam towards the front, and you might want a few small clips into the seam to help the curves lie flat. You don't need to make these too deep or too close to the stitching line. Repeat for the other side, and then if you want to be efficient, repeat for the lining pieces. Next, take your side back sections and pin in place right sides together with the corresponding edges of the back panel. You're matching the notches and aligning the raw edges. You're going to stitch each of those seams and press the seam open. You might want a few small clips into the seam to help the curves lie flat. You don't need to make these too deep or too close to the stitching line. I decided to leave off my tie as I don't like feeling a tie on my back when I'm sat in a chair, but if you want to add it, take one tie piece and arrange it right sides together, folded in half lengthwise. Align the raw edges and pin together. Stitch using a narrower 3/8 of an inch or a 1 centimetre seam, and then leave the marked end open and sew the other end closed. Trim the seam allowance down to half and turn through and press flat before repeating for the other tie. Each tie is pinned in place to the side seam edge of the side back pieces, and you're going to match the large and small dots, having the raw ends even, so the tie kind of comes in towards the middle of the bodice, based in place with either pins or a long machine stitch. Now you can place your assembled fronts on top of your assembled back and stitch together at the side seams. Repeat for the lining. With right sides together, pin the back strap piece to the end of each side front at the strap ends, matching the notches and large dots. Stitch in place and press open. Repeat for the lining. Next is making the bias strip for the rouleau button loops. You want to handle this piece quite gently since it's cut on the bias. I ended up making 2 smaller pieces to use up scraps efficiently. The bias piece is folded in half lengthways and sewn with a very small 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimetre seam. Make sure you leave both ends open. Trim the seam allowance down, and you want to trim it to at least 1/4 of an inch, 6 millimetres, or if you want to make it easier to turn through, trim it down to 1/8 of an inch, that's 3 millimetres. To turn this tube through, you can either fasten a heavy threaded needle securely stitched into one end and then push the needle eye first through the strip. The force of the threads will pull the fabric right sides out. I have a rouleau loop turner which uses a small metal hook to pull the tube through to the right side. Once turned, I like to roll my loops like a little rolling pin or dough, and this helps the seam allowance roll up inside the loop and pad it out more to look like a cord rather than a flat strip. Now you've got your loop, cut it into 7 sections. This is each 2 1/4 inch long, 6 centimetres long. Fold each loop in half, and then you're just going to tack it together 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimetres from the ends. Ideally, you want the ends to sit alongside each other rather than on top of each other to minimise bulk when you sew it into the seam. On the right hand side of the front bodice, you can position the loops face down on top of each dot marking. You're aligning the raw edges, pin, then machine baste them in place. I also like to put the pins back in after machine basting to really stop them moving around. Now we can take our underlap piece and fold it in half lengthways, right sides together and matching the raw edges. We're pinning and stitching across each short end, but we're leaving the long side alone. You can trim the seams in half if your fabric is a bit bulky. And then I like to press the seam allowance back before I turn it through wherever there's a right angle. So press the seam allowance over, then turn through, then press flat. You can baste the long raw edge together that's been unsewn with pins or a long machine stitch. You want to pin the underlap to the left front, the one without the button loops. Place it on the right side of the front, matching the notches and the large dots and keeping the raw edges even. Remember, my markings and my sizes might look a little different because I've made a petite adjustment. Baste in place with pins or a machine stitch. Now it's time to start basting the lace in place. I think it's easiest to start with the lapel to practice your trim placement. You need to pin your lace trim to the interfaced lapel pieces. placing the straight edge of the lace just inside the seam on the unnotched edges. Here is where a guideline is helpful. I actually use a tape measure that's already 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimeters wide, and I use it to draw the seam lines all around my right side of my fabric. Pin the trim in place facing inwards, and then you fold the fullness in at the corners. I find it best with a scalloped lace trim just like this to place the gap between the scallops at the corner. Then you baste in place with a long machine stitch. When turned through, the lace will pop out around the corners. Pin your lace trim down the strap and along the neckline edge, stopping at the small dot and turning back the ends into the seam allowance area. You can see how it veers off and will disappear behind where the lapel is placed. I also tried tucking it behind the opening in the seam allowance on one side, and that worked equally as well. That's the little opening where you stopped stitching at the small dot, creates a small opening, and you can tuck the lace into that area. Pin and base lace trim around the other side of the strap too, down around the armhole edge, across the back, and then up the other side. You're also going to apply lace trim below the underlap and the button loops, down around the lower edge of the top. Just like before, you're turning back the ends into the seam allowance area and also folding in fullness at the corners. To create your lapels, take one of the pieces with the basted trim and place the corresponding piece on top, right sides together, and you're going to sew around the unnotched edges. I like to use the previously sewn basting line as a guide to sewing the layers together. Trim the seam allowance down, turn through, and give it a light press. You can baste that top raw edge together with pins or a long machine stitch, and repeat for the other lapel. Then you'll pin your lapel to the upper edge of the outer front. It's really important to match the notches and the large and small dots because they're very easy to get mixed up. And remember, it's the interface side on top. Baste in place with either pins or a long machine stitch, and repeat for the other lapel. If you haven't assembled your lining already, go ahead and do that. And then with right sides together, pin the lining to the top, matching the center backs, the notches, the small and large dots, all around the edges. And then you're going to stitch the front, upper and neckline edges of the front, breaking your stitches at the small dot. So you're leaving each end of the strap unsewn, 2 gaps in the center back where the straps are inserted are left unsewn, and a larger gap in the lower edge of the back where you'll turn the entire vest through. Clip and notch the curved edges as needed around the armhole curves at the turn of the centre front square neckline. You can trim the seams if your fabric is a bit bulky. And then you're going to turn the lining inside out. Then you're going to turn the lining to the inside and give it a quick press. You want to insert the ends of the back straps through the corresponding openings in the back and pin in place using a safety pin. Now you can have a quick try on and adjust if necessary. Now reach back up through the hole you left in the lower edge for turning and turn it inside out again until you can see the strap insertion area. Sew across the strap, closing up that seam allowance, and trim the seams or trim the strap excess if needed. Turn it right sides out again, give it another press, and you can slip stitch that opening closed. To slip stitch, you're sliding your needle through the folded edge, then picking up a thread on the direct opposite side and repeating like a little ladder stitch and pull tight to close. To finish things off, align your center front edges so that the loops extend over onto the left front of the bodice, and you're going to mark your positions for the buttons under each loop. Hand sew your buttons on and you're done. I love wearing the finished top with skirts and jeans, and I'm really happy with the lace placement. Make sure to add a comment if you're planning to sew this top yourself, and give this video a thumbs up if you found the tips shared helpful. Thanks for watching, everyone.